When the United States deployed tanks to Vietnam, they entered a battlefield that was the exact opposite of what those machines were designed for. The enemy had almost no armor, there were no open plains, and there were certainly no giant tank battles like the ones US crews trained for in Europe. But near the end of the war, everything would change because a full-scale tank assault did come, and American tanks were there to meet it, just not with American crews. Before we get to that moment, we need to set the stage. In 1965, US leaders were convinced the only way to stop the spread of communism in Vietnam was to commit ground forces. So they did. The first troops, 3,500 Marines, landed at Da Nang, bringing 2 full platoons of tanks with them. But the war they expected was not the war they got. For decades, the US military had prepared for one kind of fight: stopping Soviet tank divisions across the wide, open plains of Europe. Soviet T-54s charging forward, meeting US armor head-on. Everything, training, tactics, and equipment was built for that scenario. Vietnam was none of that. Instead of open terrain, tank crews found dense jungle, swamps, rice paddies, and narrow roads. Instead of large armored formations, they faced an enemy that avoided conventional battles and preferred ambushes. Yet American commanders still believed overwhelming firepower could force the enemy to stand and fight. So they kept sending in tanks. The main US tank was the M48 Patton, with a 90mm gun and heavy frontal armor, excellent for tank-on-tank combat. But in Vietnam, there were no tank battles to fight. The Pattons were joined by M113 armored personnel carriers, the strange 6-gun M50 Antos, flamethrower, Zippo, tanks, and later, the lightweight M551 Sheridan with its massive 152mm gun. The North Vietnamese did have tanks, older T-34s and Chinese Type 59s, but they were rarely used early in the war. Australia also brought tanks, British-made Centurions. They deployed far fewer of them, but used them carefully and effectively, often with better results than expected. At first, US tanks mostly guarded bases and protected supply routes. But things changed during Operation Starlight. The US planned to strike Viet Cong forces before they could launch a major attack. Tanks were called in to secure supply convoys, but a critical mistake was made. The column moved through narrow jungle roads without infantry support. It was a perfect setup for an ambush. The lead tank was hit by an RPG just short of open ground where the crew might have defended themselves. The disabled tank blocked the road, trapping the rest of the column. The Viet Cong attacked at close range. Communication broke down and the convoy began to fall apart. One tank at the rear managed to reverse out and bring help. Another tank kept firing to hold the line, preventing the whole column from being wiped out. The enemy withdrew before reinforcements arrived, and survivors were rescued the next day. On paper, Operation Starlight was a success, but in that first real tank engagement, nearly a quarter of the crews were killed or wounded. And this was just the beginning. As more US troops arrived, hundreds of tanks entered Vietnam, but they were quickly proven wrong for the war. Tanks were stuck on narrow roads, easy targets for mines and RPGs. Viet Cong fighters stayed so close that the main gun couldn't be used, forcing crews to fight exposed with shotguns, grenade launchers, and beehive shells. Urban combat during the 1968 Tet Offensive was even worse. In cities like Hue, RPGs came from every direction while commanders restricted tank fire, leaving crews sometimes asking for permission to shoot even with an enemy aiming at them. But in 1969, at Ben Het, tanks finally got the battle they were built for. Three U.S. M48s used infrared night vision to destroy PT-76 tanks in one of the few true tank-on-tank fights of the war. The biggest clash came later. After U.S. withdrawal, North Vietnam launched the 1972 Easter Offensive with over 150 tanks. South Vietnamese crews operating leftover M48s destroyed multiple T-54s, but the assault was massive. In 1975, North Vietnamese tanks rolled into Saigon. American armor had spent most of the war fighting the wrong kind of battle, just before the war became one they could have dominated.